live in despair and yet remain hopeful. You see, the people of Israel that our prophet Isaiah was addressing had just returned from 40 years of exile in Babylon. But instead of rejoicing and celebrating their freedom, they were faced with the monumental tasks of rebuilding their country, the city of Jerusalem, their lives, and their faith in God. But God wasn't there to offer hope and help according to people's time. You see, in the midst of all this rebuilding the people had to deal with, they had heard nothing from God. It was as if God had disappeared and left everyone to fend for themselves, without any word or sign that God cared one little bit about the people's desperation. So it probably shouldn't surprise any of us to find out that people had decided that since God was nowhere to be found, they might as well reject God's ways. In other words, they turned their backs on God and lost sight of God. And I think in many ways we've done the same thing today. Someone has observed that our country has changed from one that wanted to be good to one that wants to feel good. And certainly it seems that way as we're bombarded with all sorts of ads insisting that we join the throngs either online or at the malls, crowding through the doors for that not to be missed bargain that promises to thrill and excite us. Some time ago, I found myself channel searching, and I came across a TV ad for Peloton, you know, that high-end exercise bike. The announcer began the commercial by asking the question, "What are you willing to give?" At first, I thought this would be a great commercial asking us to give of ourselves to help others in need. But to my surprise, the announcer said, "You need to give yourself 30 more seconds every day on your Peloton." Really? That's what we're supposed to be giving? Another 30 seconds of exercise? Maybe that will help our abs and our thighs, but it certainly won't help a hurting world. Now, the people of Isaiah's community may not have been figuring out how to jump on their exercise bikes every day, or shopping for bargains like HD TVs or computers or iPhones, but they too had forgotten what it meant to follow God's desire for their lives. They too had decided that feeling good was much better than being good. And so, eventually, the people of Israel found themselves living through days of darkness and despair. They wanted God to come and turn their lives around. They were finally ready to welcome God into their lives again, but God was nowhere to be found. Had God really abandoned them, given up on them? God didn't seem to be answering their pleas. People were filled with fear and doubt. But in the midst of all of this, hope still loomed. Somehow the people knew that God had not left them to fend for themselves in spite of their sins. Their hope rested in their faith. Even though they had given up on God, God had not given up on them. They knew that in God's time, there would be that long hope for redemption. True faith in God is the hope kept alive that God will never abandon us. The early followers of the of Christ didn't have much to hope for either. They were going through very difficult days of trials and persecution. On top of that, they continued to hold on to the belief that Christ would come to earth again within their lifetime, rescuing them from despair and fear. But that didn't happen. As time went on, it became apparent that Christ's second coming was up to God's time, not theirs. But they didn't abandon their faith. They knew that Christ was with them, continuing to strengthen them, to to give them courage and above all hope that God is with them always. It's all about God's time, not ours. In our world today, we're convinced that we must be in control. And when things don't go our way or happen according to our schedule, someone else is responsible. We may even blame God when things don't work out the way we expect them to. But the scripture from Mark reminds us that time is up to God, and that God's time and that God is in ultimate charge of time. Now, I'm going to tell you an Advent story, but it's all about God's time. It's a story about hope and trust in God's goodness and love. This is a story about a woman named Lydia who had no family of her own, but she did have 4 active and vivacious nieces. Sometimes Lydia had to admit that she longed for children of her own. Sometime God would come through, but so far nothing had happened. Anyway, now it was 4 weeks before Christmas. Lydia had made up her mind to forego the usual shopping madness and instead create something special for each one of her nieces. So Lydia had gone out and purchased yards and yards of purple fabric in order to make each of the girls a special Christmas dress. Purple was the color of choice since all of her nieces seemed to be in a purple phase at the moment. Right now, it was Saturday morning, and Lydia found herself struggling with the uncooperative sewing machine. As she struggled, she began to question her decision to have a different sort of Christmas this year. True, she was tired of the mall and the Christmas wish lists that were hanging on her refrigerator. Lydia, quite frankly, was feeling taken for granted. And this year, she was determined to put some real meaning back into the Christmas celebration. But at the rate things were going, it didn't look as though Lydia would be able to accomplish what she had so carefully planned. As Lydia was contemplating all these things, the mail arrived, and Lydia decided that it wouldn't hurt to allow herself one distraction. And so in her mail, Lydia found a package full of coupons. There was the phone bill, another catalog, and a hand-addressed envelope from her Aunt Mary. Lydia hadn't heard from Aunt Mary for a long time, several years as a matter of fact. Lydia tore open the envelope and found a short note and a check for $200. And Mary wrote that everything was all right and that Lydia should do something wonderful with the money. Lydia thought this must be a sign. This had to be God's way of saying, give yourself a break, go to the mall, buy those pieces something they'll really like, and let the fabric take another path. Before she knew it, Lydia had grabbed her purse and Christmas list, and out the door she went. Now, the mall was only a 20-minute walk away, and it was a lovely day. It was a good thing the bank was in the mall. Lydia figured that she could cash the check, buy 4 special gifts, have them wrapped, and be done with the whole thing by noon. What great good fortune. Lydia congratulated herself. She didn't have to put up with that old sewing machine and countless hours of cutting and stitching. Lydia cashed the check and found herself with 4 brand new $50 bills. She stuffed her newfound financial freedom into her pocket and headed right toward Playroom. When she arrived at the doll section, she pulled out one of the last sets of Fuss and Giggle triplets from the shelf and checked little Anne from her list of mental burdens. Luck was with her because there was no waiting line at the checkout. This is fiction, after all. That would be $26, said a young clerk. Lydia reached deep into her pocket, and it was empty. Her heart sank like a lump of clay. She checked the other pocket, empty. Her jeans pocket, empty too. Oh security office, where she reported the loss and was told by a stony listener, "Well, it's as good as gone, lady, but if by some miracle we find it, we'll give you a call." For a while, Lydia's walk home was long and hard. She felt just plain stupid. Had someone picked her pocket? Had the money simply fallen out? Why did she stuff the money in her pocket in the first place? Why hadn't she bothered to take the time to put the money in her purse? But as she got closer to home, her attitude began to change. She thought maybe this was a real sign. Perhaps the whole morning had been a symbol that she had allowed herself to be blown around like a leaf in the wind, especially when it came to the pressures of the coming Christmas. Lydia decided she needed to regroup, regain her composure, and concentrate on her original plan. All was not lost. This year could be different after all. Dennis also lived near the mall, and as he walked toward the mall entrance that same day, he reviewed in his mind the terrible events of this year that caused his feelings of despair. His wife had died, and now his son Alex and his daughter Elizabeth seemed to be endlessly sad, but they were managing to cope. Yet they all felt the emptiness that penetrated their daily existence. And then on top of it all, 3 months ago, Dennis had lost his job. And now here it was, 4 weeks until Christmas, and he had no money. His visit to the mall was an effort to find some sort of temporary work. Certainly someone needed extra help during the busy time. Dennis so much wanted to buy a dress for his daughter. She had been invited to the Christmas dance, but she didn't have the right sort of dress. Elizabeth stoically told her dad that she didn't really want to go to the dance anyway, but Dennis knew better. And his son Alex needed new basketball shoes, and Dennis wanted to be able to buy a decent pair for Alex. Not one of those ridiculously overpriced pair, but just some shoes that would carry Alex through the basketball season. But Dennis was broke. And even though his friends at church helped with groceries, rent, and utilities, he couldn't possibly ask for more. Dennis believed that God works for those who wait. But waiting, Dennis discovered, was difficult and downright scary. The mall was packed with people all rushing from one store to another with packages and glazed expressions on their faces. The race is on, thought Dennis, and that thought filled him with even more despair. As he approached the bank, he remembered that it hadn't been so long ago that he had had a decent-sized account there, but now it was all gone. Shaking his head, he noticed what looked like money in one corner of the tiled mall floor. Stooping down, Dennis picked up 4 crisp, new $50 bills. Is this a sign, he wondered, that all isn't lost? Have the heavens been torn open and has God's grace tumbled into this little corner of Hope Bridge Mall? Dennis glanced around as he tucked the money into his empty wallet. He headed to Ruby's Elegant Dress Shop, where he saw a beautiful dress that would be perfect for Elizabeth to wear to the dance, and the price tag said $120. Unbelievable. But now Dennis had the money with him to buy the dress. He imagined Elizabeth's surprise and delight at the sight of this dress, just for her. But Dennis knew that the money in his wallet wasn't his after all. Certainly someone had lost that money, perhaps someone who was in more dire need than he was. Guilt got the better of Dennis, and so he found himself walking out of the dress shop without the dress. Dennis headed for the mall security office, ready to turn the money over, and as Dennis entered the office, he saw a familiar face. The fellow sitting behind the desk turned out to be a high school classmate, not a good friend, but someone Dennis to greet Dennis, a look of instant recognition came over his face. For almost an hour, Dennis and Bill got themselves caught up on the past 25 years. When Bill found out that Dennis needed a tough job, Bill mentioned that he knew of one that would just suit Dennis fine. Bill was more than willing to introduce Dennis to the right people. Dennis began to feel a glimmer of hope creep into his soul. Then finally, Dennis mustered up the courage to dig out the four $50 bills from his wallet and tell Bill how he had found them. Bill was amazed. Most people would have the money spent by now, Bill said to Dennis. Hold on a minute. I'll give this woman a call. I know she'll be surprised that the money's turned up. Lydia answered the phone on the third ring. Things had gone pretty well for Lydia that afternoon. It was only 3:30 and already she had managed to have Anna's dress almost finished. The other three dresses were cut out and well underway. On the walk home, Lydia's enthusiasm for the handmade gifts had grown and filled her with a newfound sense of purpose and vigor. God works in mysterious ways, Lydia thought, as the stitches flew that afternoon. She felt strangely blessed at having lost the money. That's because she came so close to another predictable year again, but an empty pocket had saved her. Lydia actually felt thankful and hoped that whoever had found that money would put it to better use than she would have. How could all the fuss and giggle dolls in the world compare to the sweet and wonderful dresses that hung from hangers on the doorknob facing her? Lydia had to force herself to answer the phone, reluctantly tearing herself away from the now cooperative sewing machine. The money's been found? Incredible! Who found it? Where was it? Bill told Lydia all about the money and this poor unemployed fellow who had nearly spent the money on a dress for his teenage daughter and shoes for his son. Bill wondered if Lydia would like to thank Dennis. Do you want to talk with him? Would you like me to put him on the phone? No, exclaimed Lydia. Tell him to keep the money. Tell him to buy that dress and those shoes. Tell him how grateful I am to him. And tell him I don't need the money. Bill asked, are you sure? Lydia thought of Aunt Mary's words, do something wonderful with the money. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Lydia answered, feeling so thankful to have been reshaped by the divine potter as she headed back to her yards of purple cloth. Now, it's hard to tell who experienced God's grace more that day, but in the end, God's power to transform and bring hope from despair was realized. It's true. Timing is everything. And as we all wait in hope and wonder, may our preparations and waiting teach us to rely on God's time and God's gift of grace. Catherine Huey, a United Church of Christ minister and author, has made this observation. As we begin a new year, the church, we look ahead with hope and expectation, knowing that God is near in every difficult